Our story began in 1989 when our daughter Michelle was 18 years of age. So August of 1989, we landed in Kota Kinabalu, the capital of North Borneo, or Sabah as it is now, and went off on a tour of a lifetime. Probably the first thing that we did was to be taken to a set of caves where the people were harvesting birds' nests to make soup. We absolutely were astounded by these caves, where we spent the night with the people celebrating, singing, drinking their local brew, and then back to Kota Kinabalu. Then we were off to Sandakan, where the orangutan rehabilitation centre is. Going through that was a revelation in itself. Michelle was over the moon watching these young things being rehabilitated and then being sent back out into the bush. From Sandakan, we also went off onto a little island there that was called the Turtle Islands. We watched turtles being hatched of a night time and set back free. That followed back to Kota Kinabalu by plane, and we went on probably what was to be the pinnacle of the trip. We went to climb Mount Kinabalu, the highest mountain in Southeast Asia. And Michelle was rather taken with the idea of doing what Dad had done and being a mountaineer. So the climb took us 2 days to get up to the top stage, and then I was too weak by that stage, but Michelle went on and went up to the top, came back. Everything was going absolutely perfect, what you would call the perfect holiday. So having finished our mountain climb, we went down to the bottom back to Ranau, where the death march had actually finished, said our prayers to the memorials there, and from there it was flying back to Singapore, where I hired a car and we started on our journey around Malaya, Malay Peninsula, from Singapore up to Malacca and then on to Penang, where I had lived during my service over there, up a little bit north until we got to the northernmost county, and that was called Kuantan. It's up near the Thailand border, and we booked into a nice 5-star hotel, settled down, went to dinner, and halfway through dinner, Michelle left her food and started to look a little bit queasy. Naturally, we thought it was what you might say, barley belly or something. About 10 o'clock that night, Michelle started to complain about aches in her legs, and she was getting a headache. We gave her some aspirin and settled her down. But somewhere around midnight, she woke me and said the pains in her legs were getting worse and worse. But by 5 o'clock in the morning, she was in quite a lot of pain, more headaches, and at that stage I too was starting to show the same symptoms. Not so much the leg pains, but the headache and feeling of just being like a bad case of flu. About 9 o'clock it was before a doctor came, and he was not very forthcoming in his, let's say, diagnosis. He but said that she should have some more painkillers. About 11 o'clock, Michelle was obviously getting worse, and I was starting to lose interest in my surroundings. Chris said this is no good whatsoever, and decided to ring the insurance company that we'd taken out our insurance with. But again, this took a couple of hours to get anything done. They then sent an ambulance around to the hotel and took Michelle to the local hospital. We got a phone call then from the local hospital that afternoon to say that they felt that she could possibly have malaria, and that they would have to buy drugs. Our response was, or particularly Chris's response, she being a nurse and me being crook, she said, look, just give her the drugs and let's get on with things. To that they replied, but we don't have any, because we don't have malaria in Malaya anymore. By the time the next morning came around, Chris went to the hospital where she found Michelle to be in a very, very serious state. Contacted the people back in Australia once again, and she insisted that something else be done. Okay, a little later that day, the emergency aeroplane, the evacuation plane arrived. It was a Learjet air ambulance, came up from Singapore. So they loaded Michelle into that, intubated her, and wheeled me out and put me in with her. I don't remember much of the flight on the plane, but I do remember landing in Singapore, being loaded into an ambulance and driven to Mount Elizabeth Hospital. Both Michelle and I were put immediately into ICU, intensive care unit, and I was interviewed by the doctor in charge of tropical medicine for the Singapore. His name was Dr. Goh. By this stage, I had been given a drug, an anti-malarial drug, which I think was mefloquine, and I had started to recover almost immediately. At least I had my senses back. And Dr. Goh told me that we were both suffering from two types of malaria, both vivax and falciparum. I can't remember a great deal of that day, except that I know word had been sent back to Australia to my wife Doreen that we were in trouble. It was probably another 24 hours before I got any inkling again of what was happening. I was then taken out of intensive care and put into a recovery room and allowed to see Michelle. What I saw shocked me. She was intubated so much, she had so many things hanging out of her that, it was an absolute shock. I was then told that she was in a very, very serious state and there was not a great deal of hope that she would recover. We came across a problem. The doctors told us that one of the symptoms of malaria was that she was losing all of her platelets, therefore subject to bleeding, and needed them replaced. Obviously, we both said that we would give as much blood as we possibly could, but unfortunately they wouldn't take mine because they said I was infected. I'm not sure why they wouldn't take Doreen's. And there was a shortage of blood because Asians can't give a great deal of blood, being so slight. By this stage, I'd been released from the hospital, and to try to get blood, I went out into the streets of Singapore, outside the hospital, and stopping every European I could find, asking them would they go in and give blood. The only people who responded to that, strangely enough, came from Newcastle, New South Wales. They were a couple of merchant seamen from Newcastle. When we left Brisbane Airport to go on our trip, we took out a standard insurance policy which gave us $1 million medical cover. One would have thought at that time that that was plenty of money to cover everything. Unfortunately, what we found then, while still in the hospital in Singapore, they came to us and said, you're getting short of money from the insurance company. The evacuation flight from Kuantan to Singapore had cost $250,000, and intensive care was costing $10,000 per day. In the meantime, I was told that by the doctors that the only hope Michelle had of living would be to get her back to Australia. There was nothing more they could do in Singapore. The emergency assist people again came to my assistance. They were on the telephone to me every day. A woman whose only name I knew was Heather rang me every day and kept me up to date with things, encouraging me. And she was able to get 2 intensivists from Australia to fly over, and we got a booking to get back to Australia by Qantas. But we were able to get onto a Qantas flight. The sad part of that was that they asked us, or insisted that we pay for 16 seats on the plane. That was the seats that we would take up, the 2 doctors and myself. Michelle was on the wall on a stretcher. So we flew back to Australia. She was admitted to a hospital in Brisbane, and after quite a long time in intensive care there, the doctors called us in and told us that if she had another episode, they would not revive her. And that is what happened. Unfortunately, there was nothing further they can do, and she passed away. And so if you were to look up the internet and ask how many cases of malaria deaths are there in Australia, you'll be told none. If you look back across and say, you know, how long since, they'll say there are none. How many cases of malaria in Australia? Well, last year the official record is 470 cases. However, those cases were all acquired overseas and brought back to Australia. No deaths. These figures are not correct. There are many, many deaths, Australian deaths from malaria. Not in Australia, they happen overseas. They're not recorded as dying from malaria. They're recorded as dying from ARDS, adult respiratory distress syndrome, pneumonia, blood loss, organ failure. Most of these countries don't want people to know that they have a disease that can kill tourists. In 1990, we joined Rotary in Port Hedland in Western Australia, where we had moved. The first thing when I was asked in Rotary, what do you want to do in Rotary, or what do you wish to get out of it? I said, I want to destroy malaria. As soon as I realised that there was a Rotary program to fight malaria, I said, we're into this. And with the help of some of my friends, we decided that we needed some money to do it. So we organised a motorcycle ride around Australia to try to raise enough money to do something about malaria. To help me with this project, I was very, very lucky enough to get two blokes who were just as dedicated as me, not so much to malaria, but to any good cause. Doreen and I accompanied them, but not on motorcycles. We had a support vehicle with a trailer behind us. We started off in 2015 in April and went for 50 odd days, nearly 2 months, riding around Australia, talking to Rotaries, Lions, RSL clubs, anyone else who would listen, trying to get onto media, telling people about the problems of malaria, the world toll, and that they are not safe, and trying to raise funds. We did, in fact, raise $28,000. So that then allowed us to have enough money to start off on some projects which we're still working on now. What I want to say to you now is Mozzies do kill Aussies. So what I'm saying is don't let this happen to you or someone you love or someone you know. Anyone that's going over to a country where malaria is, get onto them. Tell them to take these precautions. Tell them that they are not safe. Just because you're an Australian doesn't mean that you are Mozzie proof.